Why do scammers build trust before they ask for money? Most people imagine scams beginning with a request for money. A stranger appears online, a message arrives, and very quickly the conversation turns to a financial problem. But in reality, most successful scams do not begin that way at all. They begin with something much more subtle: trust. In fact, if you look closely at how many scams unfold, you will see a pattern that appears again and again. Before money is mentioned, before urgency appears, before any request is made, the scammer invests time building a relationship. Sometimes that process takes days. Sometimes it takes weeks. In some cases, it takes months. And during that time, the conversation often feels completely normal, friendly even. This process is sometimes described as grooming. The word can sound dramatic, but the idea behind it is very simple. Grooming is the gradual process of creating emotional comfort, familiarity, and trust before introducing manipulation. It is not unique to scams. It appears in many forms of manipulation. But scammers have become particularly skilled at using it. They understand something important about human behavior. People do not usually give money to strangers, but they will often help someone they believe they know, especially if they feel sympathy, responsibility, or emotional connection. So instead of beginning with a request, the scam begins with conversation, a greeting, a casual message, a friendly exchange about everyday life. Sometimes, the scammer pretends to share common interests. They might mention work, family, hobbies, or travel. They ask questions. They listen. They respond in ways that feel thoughtful and attentive. Slowly, a sense of familiarity begins to form. And familiarity is powerful. When we speak to someone regularly, our brain begins to treat them as part of our social world, even if we have never met them. This is especially true online, where conversations can feel surprisingly intimate. People share thoughts, frustrations, hopes, and personal stories. The interaction may feel supportive, comforting, in some cases, even exciting. At this stage, nothing about the conversation appears suspicious. There are no requests, no financial discussions, just the steady growth of what appears to be a friendship. But this stage is not accidental. It is strategic, because once trust exists, a new element can be introduced: emotional leverage. Emotional leverage means using feelings to influence decisions. It works because emotions change the way people think. When someone we care about is in trouble, we often react quickly. We want to help. We want to fix the situation. And we want to do it before something worse happens. Scammers understand this very well. So after trust has been established, the story changes slightly. A problem appears. Sometimes it is a sudden emergency, a delayed payment, a temporary financial obstacle, a travel complication, or a medical situation. Importantly, the problem is usually framed as temporary, just a small hurdle, just something that can be solved quickly. And often the request seems modest at first: a small amount of money, a favor, help with a transfer, assistance purchasing something. Because the relationship has already been established, the request no longer feels like something coming from a stranger. It feels like helping someone you know, someone you have been talking to for weeks, someone who has shared stories, emotions, and personal experiences. But the process does not usually stop there. Once the first request is accepted, a second psychological pattern begins: escalation. Escalation is the gradual increase of commitment. In psychology, this is sometimes connected to something called the commitment effect. Once we take an action that supports a belief or relationship, we tend to continue behaving consistently with that choice. In other words, once someone helps once, helping again becomes easier. So the requests slowly increase. the situations become slightly more urgent, slightly more complicated. Each step feels connected to the previous one. Each request seems like a continuation of the story already in progress. And by the time the pattern becomes obvious, the emotional investment may already be significant. Many victims later describe the same experience. They say the requests did not feel strange at first. They felt reasonable, even compassionate, because they were helping someone they believed they knew. This is why scams so often succeed. Not because people are foolish, and not because they are greedy, but because scammers understand how trust, emotion, and commitment influence behavior. They understand that relationships change the way people evaluate risk. And once emotional connection is present, rational caution often becomes weaker. This is why education about manipulation patterns is so important. When people recognize the structure of a scam, the illusion begins to weaken. They can step back and examine what is really happening. If you would like to explore this subject in greater depth, including the psychological patterns that appear in financially manipulative relationships, you may find useful information in the book Break Free from Financial Abuse. That book examines how trust, emotional pressure, and financial control can become intertwined in unhealthy or exploitative situations. Because the techniques used in scams often resemble patterns that appear in other forms of manipulation as well. Understanding these patterns is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. It is about recognizing how influence works. The more clearly we understand the structure of manipulation, the easier it becomes to pause before reacting, to question what we are being asked, and to recognize when trust is being used as a tool rather than a genuine connection. In the modern world, where conversations increasingly happen online and relationships can form across distance and anonymity, this awareness has become more important than ever. Scams do not usually begin with money. They begin with trust. And understanding that simple fact may be one of the most powerful ways to protect yourself.